Every country on Earth is drowning in debt. The United States, $38 trillion. The European Union, $14 trillion. Japan, nearly $9 trillion. Even oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia and export giants like China owe staggering sums. But here's the paradox that keeps economists awake at night. If everyone owes money, who exactly gets paid? Welcome to Wealth Untold, where we uncover the hidden mechanisms of money and power. Today, we're solving a mystery that touches every person on this planet, because debt isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's the invisible architecture holding the modern world together. And what we're about to discover is deeply unsettling. To understand how we reached $315 trillion in global debt, nearly 3 times the size of the entire world economy, we need to travel back to 1694. England was at war with France and running dangerously low on gold. King William III faced a choice: lose the war or reinvent how nations finance themselves. He chose revolution. The king struck a deal with London merchants. In exchange for funding the war, they would receive something unprecedented: a permanent stream of interest payments, backed by future tax revenue. To manage this arrangement, the Bank of England was born. This wasn't just innovative, it was world-changing. For the first time in history, a government could spend money it didn't have yet, and lenders received something they could trade, sell, and pass down through generations: a government bond. The modern financial system had just been conceived. France copied it, the Netherlands refined it, the United States weaponized it to fund a revolution and build an empire from sea to shining sea. National debt stopped being a mark of weakness. It became a measure of power. The ability to borrow became the ability to rule. Empires no longer needed to conquer territory to extract gold. They issued bonds to extract interest. The battlefield became the balance sheet. Fast forward 3 centuries. Global borrowing now increases by roughly $1 trillion every 100 days. Every country owes, every bank lends, and every citizen, through taxes, savings, and pensions, is both debtor and creditor at the same time. So let's ask the uncomfortable question: who actually holds the other end of the rope? Let's start with the United States, because its debt isn't just national, it's the backbone of global finance. Of that $38 trillion, about half is publicly held. And here's where it gets interesting. Roughly 2/3 of those investors are American. Banks, pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, and the Federal Reserve itself. The remaining third, about $9 trillion, sits in foreign hands. Japan holds the most at around $1 trillion. China holds about $800 billion. Then the UK, Luxembourg, and Belgium. So when someone says America is in debt to China, that's technically true, but it's only about 2% of the total. The vast majority of American debt is owed to Americans. Here's how the circle works. The Treasury issues bonds. American banks and funds buy them. The Federal Reserve often buys them back, creating new dollars in the process. Americans pay taxes that fund interest on those bonds, which then flow into American retirement accounts. It's a mirror reflecting itself. The debt is real, but the creditor is mostly a ghost, a projection of the same system. And this isn't just American, it's planetary. Japan lends to the US through treasuries. The US lends to Europe through the IMF. Europe lends to developing nations through the World Bank. Those nations lend back to advanced economies by parking reserves in Western bonds. It's a global game of financial hot potato, except the potato is made entirely of promises. Every country holds someone else's IOU. Every promise is secured by another promise. Imagine a poker table where every player has borrowed chips from the person next to them. The only rule keeping the game alive: nobody stands up. But there's a deeper layer most people never see: the markets themselves. Behind every government bond sits a shadow network: hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks managing tens of trillions in assets. They are the real gatekeepers of global power. They decide which nations can borrow cheaply and which will pay crushing interest rates just to survive. When they lose confidence, currencies collapse, governments fall, and entire economies can be restructured overnight. Democracy decides who governs. Markets decide who survives. And at the center of this web, central banks. Central banks don't just manage debt, they manufacture it. Every time the Federal Reserve or European Central Bank buys government bonds, it creates new money out of thin air. The liability of one becomes the asset of another. Here's the part that breaks most people's brains. There is no such thing as debt-free money. Every dollar in your wallet, every coin in your pocket, every digital number in your bank account represents a unit of debt somewhere else in the system. Money is debt. They're the same thing. For decades, this perpetual motion machine has sustained itself through one thing: confidence. As long as investors believe governments will pay interest, even if never the principal, the machine keeps turning. But what happens when confidence shatters? We've seen it. Greece in 2010, unpayable debts, bond panic, yields spiking into the stratosphere. The bailout came with austerity, tax hikes, spending cuts, mass unemployment, an entire generation sacrificed. Argentina, repeated defaults turned debt into a national curse. Sri Lanka, fuel shortages and political collapse when foreign currency ran out. When the system breaks, the creditors suddenly become very visible. The IMF, the rating agencies, anonymous bondholders who hold entire nations by the throat. Yet even after collapse, the same logic restarts. New loans replace old ones. The machine resets with a new name on the same balance sheet. Because here's the secret they don't want you to understand. In the 21st century, debt isn't designed to be repaid. It's designed to be rolled over forever. When you or I take a loan, we're expected to pay it back. But governments operate on a completely different model. They treat debt like a subscription service, issuing new bonds to pay off old ones in a process called refinancing. The interest becomes the real product. It's rent charged for stability. The United States will never clear its $38 trillion debt. It will refinance it forever. Japan has been rolling over its debt for decades, now exceeding 250% of GDP. And yet Japanese government bonds yield near zero. Why? Because investors aren't waiting to be repaid. They're waiting to renew the deal. Government debt isn't viewed as a liability anymore. It's the safest collateral in existence. Pension funds hold it. Banks use it as security. Central banks treat it as money itself. Now imagine if Washington somehow decided to pay down every dollar of its debt. Banks and funds worldwide would suddenly lose their most stable asset. The dollar supply would shrink dramatically, triggering deflation and economic collapse. Paying off the debt would destroy the very thing that makes the economy function. So governments do the opposite. They keep issuing more, not recklessly, but rhythmically. The debt becomes capitalism's heartbeat, pulsing through every pension, mortgage, and market on earth. That's why when politicians talk about balancing the budget or paying down the national debt, they're selling an illusion. The goal isn't to eliminate debt, it's to keep it sustainable, serviceable, and desirable enough that the system never stops believing in it. Because once belief fades, the numbers stop mattering. Confidence collapses, interest rates spike, and the economy built on rolling promises grinds to a halt. The plan was never to pay it back. The plan is to keep the world believing it will. It's a closed loop of trust. And as long as that trust holds, the numbers can stretch indefinitely. But here's the part they leave out. Trust is not evenly distributed. When we say we owe it to ourselves, that's only half true. Interest payments don't flow equally through society. They flow upward from taxpayers and workers to the institutions and investors that hold the debt. Debt isn't just a transfer between countries, it's a transfer between classes. That's why global inequality and global indebtedness rise in perfect synchronization. The system rewards those who own debt and punishes those who merely pay it. This is the same story scaled up, from households to nations, from nations to the planet. Creditors aren't villains, debtors aren't victims. They're two sides of the same engine. The problem is, what happens when the engine runs out of fuel, when new borrowing can't keep pace with old promises? So who's the creditor in this global paradox? It isn't China, it isn't Wall Street, it isn't the IMF, it's all of them, and it's us. The modern financial system has turned debt itself into money. Governments issue it, banks multiply it, investors trade it, and citizens depend on it. The line between debtor and creditor has blurred beyond recognition. Debt once meant bondage. Today, it means balance. But if that balance ever tips, if confidence breaks, the illusion ends, and we'll remember what debt really is. A promise that can't be kept forever. If this opened your eyes to how the system really works, subscribe to Wealth Untold. The hidden history of money continues next week.